Hare Krishna, Prabhu, welcome to the Sydney temple.
Haribol, thank you.
Nice to see you here again. You were here same time last year?
April.
April.
Yeah.
Okay. So you make one trip to Sydney once a year?
Sometimes more. It just depends. Depends on what's happening.
I believe you had a deep history with the Sydney temple as well. Could you tell us a little bit about your time here? How did you end up being at the Sydney temple?
Well, I remember years ago coming to Sydney when they held Rath Yatra in the city. They used to have a big program just near Central Park there. Not Central Park, Central Station, in one of the parks on the side of the station. And the first time I came, I was living in Coffs Harbour, I think, from memory. And I used to come down every year and help wrap they had these big ropes they'd use for the chariot to pull the rath, and they'd wrap them with fabric, so that they look nice. And then, so we used to do that. We used to tie them to the bottom of the stairwell or the staircase in Sydney, the Sydney Temple in the King's Cross, and then wrap them with fabric. And then I remember one time when I was there was some electrical fault on the altar. And so the devotees asked me if I could come and fix the electrical fault. So that was the first time I ever went on the altar. It wasn't even anything. It wasn't initiated or anything like that at that time.
But you had heard about the devotees prior to this?
Yeah, I met the devotees sometime before that. And the first place I went to, the first temple I went to was New Govardhan, and the Sydney temple was the second temple. And I used to come down to Sydney fairly regularly when I was living in Coffs Harbour. And I'd stay with people in Darlinghurst, and the temple was just not very far from Darlinghurst. Actually, it was in Darlinghurst. So I used to go there quite regularly. And then some years later, when Lakshmivan was the head pujari, since then I'd been trained in deity worship, and I was training devotees around the world in deity worship. So when Lakshmivan was the head pujari, I spent quite a significant amount of time here with him, working on the standards of worship, working on the procedures. And then, I don't remember exactly what year it was, but one year I came here and spent 4 or 5 months here renovating the deity department. So we built the altar, and actually the whole deity department, we gutted it and moved the deities out the front and put them in Radha Gopinath put them in a smaller temporary altar, and then completely renovated the deity department, put marble floor, marble walls, everything like that.
Did you come from a background of?
I had a bit of experience, but not like I was a builder or anything like that. I just had experience.
So that was your first attempt at using your skills in Krishna service, probably?
Not really. I mean, like I said, I've been doing it for years before that, just doing, I mean, as far back as 1980, I guess, maybe before that. About in 1980, I was just doing different things, coming to the festivals, coming to the temples, things like that. That probably would have been around the early 90s that we redid the altar here. I think the deities might have moved over here in 94 or 5.
Right. And I believe your main service now is related to deity.
Yeah. I serve in the capacity of ISKCON Deity Worship Minister, and so essentially that's aiming at trying to guide and inspire devotees in deity worship, help with training and stuff like that. But primarily it's just trying to inspire devotees, because you find it's not easy for devotees to stick. Sometimes it's not easy for devotees to stick in one service, because Kali Yuga, material world, the nature of all these different things, it's not easy to stick at one thing, especially if you're not feeling a lot of reciprocation or satisfaction for various reasons. Often it comes from just struggling to advance in Krishna consciousness, or there's so many factors involved. But having been doing deity worship for a long time myself, and knowing others that have done deity worship for a long time, and seeing the benefits that one can accrue from doing deity worship, I see that if we can inspire others in their deity worship, they'll accrue the same benefits. And ultimately it means things like becoming peaceful, becoming satisfied, becoming purified. So if I can inspire devotees in that path, they'll get a lot of benefit from deity worship.
And was that the motivation for you to set up the training center in Mayapur, the Mayapur Academy?
Well, that was interesting, because what happened there was, from traveling around the world quite extensively, I was seeing that there's a lot of work to be done, in terms of training pujaris, helping them to establish standards of worship, in line with the standards that Prabhupada wanted. Yet, just myself traveling around the world, I could see, there's more than 400 temples in ISKCON, and if I was to visit, each temple for a week, it would take me 8 years to go, at least 8 years to get to all the temples. So that didn't sound very practical to me. So the idea of establishing the school was to have greater reach. So rather than us going to all the temples, and we still do travel to temples, but rather than going to all the temples in the world, we then thought, let the pujaris come here. And so that proved to be quite effective. We average about 40 students a year who do the diploma course, and this year we're on our 11th year. So we've trained, several thousand devotees at various levels of training, and at the diploma level of training, which is a 16-week course, I would estimate we've done around 500.
Wow.
I mean, I've never actually sat down and done the figures on it, but every year there's at least 40.
And it's taught in English. I believe there are more languages.
English, yeah. We started on a Hindi diploma this year also. That's just in the beginning stage. I think it went for 12 weeks. I'm not very much involved in the other languages, but I think it went for 12 weeks. It was very successful. They had quite a lot of nice devotees there, head pujaris and things like that. And we also do a Bengali diploma. So we alternate between the Hindi and the Bengali. But then one thing we've started working on last year, we did our first regional camp. Well, actually, 2 years ago we did this in Villa Vrindavan in Italy. We had a regional campus, and where local pujaris came for training, and that was successful. But I think we tried to, in that case, we tried to do too much, and therefore we weren't able to achieve the goals we were trying to achieve with it by trying to do too many courses or too many units. So what we did last year in the UK at Bhaktivinoda Manor is we just presented the temple worship unit, and we had 22 devotees went through the whole course. It was very successful, and they expressed their appreciation for what they got from the training and stuff, and they feel it's really helped them a lot.
Right. Do you see over your time, almost 25 years, do you see an increased liking for deity seva from the devotee community, especially the youth?
Especially?
The young, the youth?
I think that's, I wouldn't say it's a widespread thing in ISKCON. I think it's more down to individual communities. Whatever you find the leadership in an individual community focuses on, then you'll find generally that's the focus of the community. And so if the leadership is able to inspire the community, because that's really, as it says, Yad Yad Achari Shesh, that's whatever a great man does, the common man follows. So, basically most people look for someone to follow. Whether they do it consciously or not, we're looking for someone to follow. And when you have someone who's very inspiring to follow, then you'll find that devotees will, rally to that sort of path and then follow whatever that devotee is doing. So you'll find in temples where the leadership has a focus on preaching and outreach and things like that, then people are inspired to do that. Or if the leadership has, a focus on temple worship, then the devotees will be inspired to do that. So you'll see, like with particular initiating spiritual masters, for instance, whatever their focus is, generally the disciples follow that focus.
Yes.
Because they're inspired.
Yes.
And Krishna consciousness is something that comes from inspiration, not from just rules and books and things like that, but actually comes from personal inspiration.
And that personal inspiration would be applicable to a pujari as well, although he has to follow the rules and regulations.
Yeah. Well, ideally, someone who takes up the role. See, there's different things to look at there. One person can just take up the duties of being a pujari, and just go through and do the rituals and things like that. But then another person will take up the role of being a brahmana. A brahmana is the leader of the community. And this is our goal with the Mayapur Academy, is not to train pujaris. Our goal is to inspire devotees to become brahmanas. Because then if one is a brahmana, then all these things will be achieved.
That's a very good point, yes.
If you have someone, because a brahmana is a leader. Someone who can do deity worship is just someone who can, it's like you can teach anyone to do rituals of deity worship. It's very simple. They're very repetitive. But that's not what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to, inspire devotees to see the value of being a brahmana and to take up the role of being a brahmana in the society, because then they'll become leaders of the society. Because that's the role of the brahmana, is to be a leader.
And what difficulty do you see in helping people become these ideal brahmanas? There's quite a range of challenges there, but also it's two-sided. It's a really positive thing, and once devotees get this inspiration, then they just push ahead themselves. They don't need, it's no longer difficult. So the point is to try to get them over this hurdle. Yes.
Because we have the material nature pushing back in so many different ways against us. And even just, the notion of just like not actively working towards our personal cultivation and spiritual life in this material world, it's just like a mirror. If you just leave it sit there, it just becomes covered by dust. You don't have to do anything. It'll just gradually become covered by dust from the effect of being in the material world. So the same way for the soul in the material world, if they're not pushing back against the tide of material nature, then they become covered by the dust of this material nature and they become contaminated. So one needs to be active in their endeavors, very active in their endeavor to overcome the effect of material nature, and overcome the conditioning that's pushed upon us by the material nature. So if we can help devotees to see how easy it is to apply themselves to the process of Krishna consciousness and overcome the effect of material nature, and then give them some guidance on or show them the pathway, or show them, give them some skills and knowledge and stuff like that, then naturally they'll take to the process, because they can see it's superior, and it's actually the nature of the soul to serve Krishna. So, excuse me. Our main focus is to really try to instill the values of Brahman Vaishnava in the devotees. Once they have those values, then this drives them to seek out the skills and the knowledge. So we really don't have to equip devotees so much with knowledge and skills if we can, focus on the values. So we do train devotees in knowledge and skills, obviously, because temples are looking for people who can come, devotees be able to come to the temple and dress the deities, cook the deities, offer arati, offer bhoga, stuff like that, just do different yagas, samskars and things like that. So obviously that knowledge and skills need to be there. But by focusing on the values, we then are able to put devotees in the situation where they focus on a lifetime of self-improvement. Not just they come once, they do a course, 16 weeks later they go home and that's the end of it. Mm-hmm. That's not what bhakti is about. That's not the process of devotional service. The process of devotional service means that our whole life is dedicated to improving ourselves as devotees, to serving Krishna more and more effectively.
That's a very good point. You mentioned about 400 temples, and I'm sure you would have gone to a good majority of them. Where do you rate the level of standard when it comes to deity service? Is there a lot to improve, or are you satisfied?
I try not, even though I come and do revisions of the worship, I try not to rate or compare. I just don't think that does justice to the devotee service, because if you look at, like you can take two devotees both doing deity worship. You can look at the way one devotee is doing deity worship and you might think, well, this is not very good. Or you can look at another devotee who's doing deity worship and think, well, this is very good. But if you actually look at the intention of the devotees, they're both trying to the best of their capacity to serve the deities. That's really what you have to look at, is how they're trying to serve the deities. They're trying to do their best to please the Lord. And I think if we can always recognize that and try to bring that out and try to fan that spark, then the devotees will be trying to improve their service to Krishna.
Sure.
Whether it's at this level or that level, the main thing from my perspective is as long as we're trying to improve what we're doing. We may not necessarily have the skills. Like some devotees are fantastic cooks, other devotees aren't. But you look at what is the intention of the devotee. If the intention of the devotee is to try to please Krishna with their offerings, then that's really what we need to fan. Not And of course, we want devotees to be able to cook things very well or do artis very well or whatever. And so the training is there. But the real thing I see is to try to fan that spark of attachment to serving Krishna, to pleasing Krishna. Then everything else will come.
Sure. And finally, I've read some of the newsletters that come from the Mayapur Academy, and I noticed that you lay a special emphasis on having some quotes from Prabhupada in those newsletters. Now, over the years, with regards to deity service, what's your favorite quote, either from Srila Prabhupada or from a devotee colleague or from someone else? What's the one that always is in front of you?
There's many amazing quotes from Srila Prabhupada, and it's hard to pick out a favorite, because we find Prabhupada's quotes are always relevant to a particular time, place and circumstance, and we get different types of inspiration. There is one quote I find particularly inspirational. I'm only paraphrasing because my memory is not so good with these things. But Srila Prabhupada, I believe it's in a purport. He writes something along the lines of like, when the devotee dresses Krishna with all his heart and soul, and he tries to please Krishna with his service, then Krishna smiles. And then if Krishna smiles upon you just once, your life's mission is perfected. So I think this is a very nice kind of mood. It's like, let's just try to get Krishna to smile upon us. Then everything else is okay. It doesn't matter if we're, because Prabhupada doesn't talk about, Krishna, the devotee sort of dressing the deity to a certain level or anything. It just says with his heart and soul. And that's what Krishna's looking for. So I think that's what we need to encourage devotees in deity worship, is that with their heart and soul, they just try to please Krishna. And then Krishna will become happy.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Nrsimha Kavaca Prabhu. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom from your experience, from your seva, and with quotes like that, just to get the smile from Krishna is pretty much our mission in life. Thank you so much, and we look forward to mission accomplished. Most people think it's mission impossible, but it can be accomplished. But thank you so much. We hope to welcome you back to Sydney over and over again, and I hope you spend weeks and months with us. Thank you once again. Hare Krishna.